Hello there, and welcome to the planet's memory, a quiet space where the deep questions drift softly and science is allowed to breathe. Tonight, we'll wander together into one of the oldest ideas never quite spoken aloud. A thought so strange and still that it feels almost like it came from somewhere else. What if the life we know, your body, my voice, the forests, the whales, the birds, and the breath, didn't start here? What if it wasn't Earth's idea at all, but a memory, one left behind by minds not our own? Before we let the thought carry us too far, may I ask, where are you listening from tonight? Are the lights dimmed? Is your room still? Perhaps you're already lying down, eyes soft, letting your thoughts ebb and flow like waves? If you find comfort in stories that don't rush, in questions without pressure, I'd be grateful if you left a like or subscribed. It helps this quiet corner reach others like you, others who are also wondering about the stories Earth might be keeping. Now let's return to the idea. We've always assumed life began with chaos, a random lightning strike, a lucky molecule, a pool warmed by sun. But maybe it wasn't chaos at all. Maybe it was inheritance. Maybe it was a gift. Maybe Earth didn't discover life. Maybe it remembered it. Imagine a world so ancient its soil didn't even exist yet. Only stone and gas and falling dust. Oceans forming not from rivers, but from comets. No birds, no trees, no bones. Only chemistry and time. And into that silence, something arrives. Something so quiet it doesn't disturb the atmosphere. Just changes it. Not with machines, not with light, but with something much smaller. Pattern. A sequence. A code. DNA. For letters endlessly rearranged. It doesn't think. It doesn't breathe. But it builds breath, and thought, and time. In the blink of a geological eye, this pattern begins unfolding itself, into cells and skin and stories. Could it be that DNA, the very blueprint of life, didn't come from Earth but came to Earth? Not by chance, but by purpose. What if those 4 letters were seeded, planted like a memory beneath the waves, a soft algorithm designed not to dominate but to grow? Not a machine but a whisper. Not a beacon, but a reminder. Some scientists call this directed panspermia, the theory that life was intentionally placed here by an intelligent species from elsewhere. Not to colonize, not to control, but perhaps to continue something. Because there's something strange about the timing. The universe is old, unimaginably so, over 13 billion years. But Earth? Just 4.5. Life began here almost immediately after the planet cooled enough to hold water. It didn't wait. It didn't stumble. It surged, as if it had been waiting for the right moment. And when we look at the chemistry of that early Earth, we see a world hostile to complexity. Volcanic gases, no oxygen, radiation slicing through the atmosphere. It's a miracle anything survived. But not only did it survive, it thrived, replicated, diversified, as though following a map already written. Could that map have come from somewhere else? Somewhere older? Somewhere lonely? Maybe there was a species, not human, not even close, who learned how to protect their legacy not through monuments or metal, but through biology. Maybe they realized that entropy would eat their buildings, their thoughts, their stars. But not DNA. Not if it was hidden inside an ocean. Not if it was planted deep enough. Not if it could evolve. Because evolution is the greatest editor in the universe. Keeps what works. Shapes what thrives. But the original code, that seed, could still be buried somewhere in us. Maybe in the so-called junk DNA. Maybe in something we haven't learned to name yet. And if that's true, then we are not just alive. We are living memory. We are walking scripts written by someone or something who no longer walks among us. Or maybe they never walked at all. Maybe they drifted, floated, existed beyond matter. Maybe their language wasn't sound but pattern. And Earth was chosen not for its beauty, but for its chemistry, for its promise. Maybe they never expected us to know. And maybe that's why we don't. We go about our days believing we are the first, the pinnacle, the authors of meaning. But beneath our feet, beneath the fossil record and tectonic scars, there may be echoes. Not of dinosaurs, not of civilizations, but of design. of intention, of a kindness so vast we mistook it for chance. And if life itself is an inheritance, what does that make us? Not accidents, not anomalies, but continuations, reflections, echoes. Maybe that's why we feel drawn to the stars. Not because we're explorers, but because we're homesick. Because something in us remembers being part of something bigger, something quieter, something older than Earth. And yet, if this much can be remembered without knowing, what else might we have forgotten? Before the first heartbeat, before even the first cell, there was a different kind of world. A world without color or sound, without breath or blood. No wind in the trees, no sky not as we know it, no birdsong or bone or voice, just a quiet ocean of forces, and the long patience of matter becoming something more. We often say life began in the ocean, but what was the ocean before biology? Not blue, not alive, just liquid and light, minerals suspended in motion, heat pulsing up from fractures in the seafloor, hydrogen bubbling from stone, carbon drifting from above, molecules meeting, splitting, dissolving, beginning again, over and over, for millions of years. No awareness, no desire, just chemistry. But even in this silence, there were patterns. We like to think of randomness as noise, as chaos, but even noise has its shape. And in the pre-life sea, the molecules were not idle. They collided, they folded, they nested. Slowly, achingly slowly, they learned how to hold together, to resist decay for just a little longer. And that little longer was everything. Could it be that these early reactions were not accidents, but arrangements? Not because someone was watching, but because the laws themselves of thermodynamics, of entropy, of charge were not aimless but poised, ready, as if waiting for the first whisper of continuity. We see it now in laboratories, how amino acids can form in lightning simulations, how lipids will self-assemble into tiny hollow spheres if left alone in water. No design, just tendency. But what is a tendency, if not a memory trying to repeat itself? Even now, cells follow these same patterns. Proteins fold, not because they're told, but because their shapes are inevitable. Their shapes are stories encoded in physics. Perhaps they always were. Perhaps the chemistry of early Earth was not merely reacting but remembering. And deep in that remembering, life stirred. Not with will, not yet, but with persistence. Small chains of molecules, fragile and hungry, began copying themselves. Not perfectly, but just enough. One copy became two. Two became four. Errors crept in, and the errors made new forms. Some lasted, most dissolved. And in this strange rhythm, this recursive improvisation, life emerged from non-life. But was it random? Or was it inevitable? Or was it arranged? When we look back through the geologic record, we find signs not of chaos, but of increasing order. Isotopes arranged in patterns that suggest metabolism. Bands of iron laid down by ancient microbial breathing. Stromatolites rising like stone coral from shallow seas, built by colonies of blue-green life too small to see, too ancient to name. These were not the first lives, but they were the first architects. The first to shape the world around them, to leave a trace. And yet, the silence before them was not empty. It was preparatory. A long breath held by the planet, waiting for the exhale of biology. Could it be that the silence itself was part of the plan? Not a pause, but a prelude. If an alien species had once hoped to sow life here, would they not begin with chemistry? Would they not seed the seas with the tools that could build the tools that would one day build cells? Would they not trust the laws of physics to do the rest? It's easy to forget that life doesn't begin with life. It begins with connection, with one molecule reaching toward another, with a bond, a dance, a refusal to come apart. And that dance may still echo inside us, because the molecules that formed before biology are still here, still part of you, in your bones, in your breath, in your thoughts. The hydrogen in your water, the carbon in your cells, older than Earth. Born in the cores of stars, scattered across the galaxy, gathered here not by fate, but perhaps by design. Not all designs are mechanical. Not all architects need blueprints. Sometimes it's enough to place the pieces where they will meet. Sometimes the silence is part of the message. And if the chemistry of pre-life was a kind of waiting, then what else might it be waiting for? What else might have been placed in those waters? Quiet, unseen, still ticking forward, molecule by molecule. And if all this arose not just from Earth but from memory, a memory older than our world, then what might happen when that memory is fully remembered? Because once the pieces connect, once the chemistry learns to recognize itself, the blueprint will awaken, and the ocean will no longer be alone. But before that moment, before biology had a name or a purpose, there was still the ocean floor, still the stone, still the heat, still the silence, and deep beneath it all, something that may not be alive, but may still be watching, waiting. And if life began not at the surface, but in those deep places, those dark and hidden cradles, then what else might lie buried, still untouched, still unknown, waiting for us to look beneath, waiting to remember? But what if the memory didn't begin on Earth at all? What if it began in dust? Long before Earth had mountains or oceans or even a name, the building blocks of everything we are, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, were drifting in the dark. Not drifting aimlessly, but moving with the currents of stars being born and stars collapsing. Elements forged in heat and scattered by silence. Ingredients that would, someday, become breath and thought and curiosity. But for now they were only dust. Dust, drifting across the galaxy. Dust older than Earth. It's strange to think that everything alive is made of something that once wasn't. Something scattered, unassembled, a recipe without a kitchen, a story without a page. And yet, here we are, breathing, wondering, remembering. So we ask, could this dust, these cosmic seeds, have been arranged not only by chance but by intention? When we look at meteorites, we find amino acids, the tiny, twisting molecules that help build proteins. We find organic compounds in the tails of comets, frozen for billions of years. The ingredients for life, floating between stars. Not rare, not random, abundant, as if life isn't an accident at all, but a pattern looking for a place to land. Could Earth have been chosen? This position is gentle, not too close to the sun, not too far. A place where water can remain liquid, where carbon can circulate, where chemistry can breathe. Was it luck? Or was it selected? Like a cup set beneath a drifting cloud, waiting to be filled? Perhaps the architects, if they existed, didn't build us like machines. Perhaps they didn't carve or mold. Perhaps they scattered ingredients across thousands of worlds and trusted time to do the stirring. And maybe they left behind not blueprints in metal, but in dust. Because dust lingers. It floats into every corner, coats everything. It is forgotten until it settles, and only then does it begin to tell its story. We think of dust as decay, as what's left behind. But dust is also origin. The stars died to make it, and from it we rise. And when we look at our own bodies, we find not randomness, but resonance. We are made of elements that know how to hold hands. Molecules that shape themselves into spirals, into ladders, into scripts. The double helix of DNA is not only beautiful, it's precise, efficient, self-correcting. A language that writes itself. Could such a language have come from nothing? Maybe, maybe not. Some scientists wonder why life prefers left-handed amino acids, when right-handed ones also exist. Why life's molecules lean in one direction, always. Is it coincidence? Or is it the signature of a specific recipe? A bias set long ago, like a thumbprint pressed into clay? And if that's true, who or what pressed it? We will never see them if they existed. They may not have looked like anything we'd recognize. They may not have had bodies. They may have been more like patterns than people, ancient minds that had moved beyond form. But perhaps they still wanted something to carry forward. Not their image, but their impulse, their longing, their memory. So they placed it in dust and let it fall. And when the dust reached Earth, it found a planet ready to receive. with heat beneath and water above, with lightning to stir and time to wait. The dust settled, mixed, folded into the crust, the air, the sea, and then quietly it began to awaken, not with a roar, but with a ripple, a slow and sacred blooming. And now we stand here, made of that same dust, looking back at the sky it came from. We breathe it in with every gust of wind. We wash it from windows, sweep it from shelves, wipe it from our skin, not knowing that we are brushing off the oldest story ever written. Because if there was a blueprint, it was never etched in stone. It was scattered in particles, layered in sediment, spun into clouds, hidden in dust. And if dust can remember how to become life, what else might it become, if given enough time? What else might already be forming, unnoticed, waiting for the right hands to find it, or the right minds to become it? And if our own memory was seated in this way, then what might lie deeper, beyond the dust, beneath the soil, under the ocean floor? Because if memory can ride in dust, what else might be waiting in the stone? The ground beneath us feels still, permanent, trustworthy. It holds up buildings, grows our food, and records our footprints. But Earth's crust is anything but quiet. It is a layered scroll, slowly writing and rewriting itself across millions of years. A restless archive. Sediment settles, heat rises, plates shift, mountains crumble, oceans open and close. And through it all, the planet keeps a record, not in ink but in pressure and time. Some of that record we've learned to read. Fossils, strata, isotopes locked in crystal. We've traced the breath of ancient atmospheres from air bubbles caught in ice. We've charted the wanderings of continents from the iron memory of lava flows. But for all we've uncovered, there are layers we still don't understand. Formations that defy explanation. Objects misclassified. Artifacts dismissed. Because what would we expect the tools of alien architects to look like? Would they resemble ours, made of metal, wires, and circuits? Probably not. Would they be built to last? Perhaps. But perhaps their version of longevity isn't durability. Perhaps it's disappearance. Perhaps their technology was designed to integrate into geology itself. Not to stand out, but to blend in. Not to resist time, but to become time. Could such relics, technofossils, already lie beneath our feet? We think of fossils as bones and shells. But fossils can be anything that left a trace. An impression in mud, a ripple in the magnetic field, a layer of iridium no asteroid can explain. If alien tools once touched this world, might they have left marks too subtle to recognize? A seam of rare elements deep within the crust. A patch of glass fused in a way no volcano could manage. A lattice of carbon too regular to be random. Not evidence in the dramatic sense, but in the geological sense, patient, buried, overlooked. The deeper we dig, the stranger things become. Some stones are filled with patterns that look, to the eye, like circuitry, perfect squares, symmetry in crystal growth, quartz wrapped in metal veins. Of course, geology can explain these mostly. Pressure, heat, mineral flow. Nature, after all, is a great mathematician. But part of us still wonders, is it possible that some of what we call mineral formation is something else? Could a buried machine 1 billion years old look like rock? Could it become rock? Could it choose to become indistinguishable from the Earth it helped shape? Geologists speak of deep time, the idea that Earth's story is written not in years, but in epochs. Millions upon millions of years stacked like pages. And within that scale, human history is barely a breath. But a civilization before us, before life as we know it, could have had millions of years to rise and vanish, leaving behind only what stone would agree to keep. And if they wanted to be forgotten, would they not hide their tools in the deepest layers? Maybe some aren't even buried. Maybe some are scattered across deserts, mistaken for natural formations. Balanced rocks that hum faintly at frequencies we don't hear. Caves where compass needles misbehave. Fossils that carry no DNA yet seem shaped, not grown. Could these be remnants of something engineered? Or are we just seeing ourselves in the shadows? We can't be sure. Not yet. But we do know this. Earth has erased almost everything. Through erosion, subduction, and deep planetary recycling, more than 90% of the crust that once was is gone. Melted, crushed, folded back into the mantle. The continents drift like rafts, and with them, the memories of what might have once stood upon them. So what survives? Only the deepest scars, the hardest minerals, the quietest whispers. If we are ever to find technofossils, tools of beings who may have seeded life or shaped it, they will not be in golden monuments or shining towers. They will be subtle, half-erased, misnamed in textbooks, labeled as geologic anomalies, forgotten, unless we learn to look again, not with a pickaxe but with a question, not with certainty but with listening, because if they came, whoever they were, they may not have meant to leave behind a signature. They may have meant only to pass through, to place something, to plant a memory, and then to vanish into stone. And if their tools were built to vanish, what else might have vanished with them? What else might we be standing on right now? And more curiously still, what might we be made of? Because even as we search beneath our feet for signs of the forgotten, there's something older, quieter, already inside us. Written into every breath, every cell, every heartbeat. DNA. Not just a molecule, but a message. Not just a structure, but a script. For simple letters, A, T, C, and G, combined in endless sequences to form the blueprint of life. Everything that walks, crawls, swims, or thinks owes its shape to this silent language. And yet, the more we learn, the stranger it becomes. DNA is not just functional, it's elegant, resilient, redundant in all the right ways, and remarkably efficient. It has the capacity to store not only instructions for survival, but for change, mutation, adaptation, evolution. It builds you, and then quietly leaves the door open for the next version of you. We often say it evolved, that this code was sculpted by time, by pressure, by the survival of what worked. And maybe that's true. But what if it's not the whole truth? What if the code itself, the very framework of biology, carries signs not only of biology but of design? Some researchers have noticed strange patterns in the genetic alphabet, mathematical regularities that don't seem necessary for life, and yet, they're there. Palindromes, mirror sequences, ratios so consistent across species that they seem to suggest optimization, not randomness. Could this be evolution's efficiency? Or could it be the residue of something more deliberate? When we design languages, human languages, we build in error correction. In programming, we include redundancy, safety nets. DNA has those too. Catches most of its own mistakes, corrects with surprising grace. And even when it fails, it often fails in ways that lead somewhere new, not just destruction but variation. We call that fitness, natural selection. But we might also call it intention, maybe not conscious intention, maybe not someone drawing up blueprints, but a kind of logic that existed before logic, a reason hidden inside chemistry, or perhaps a gift, because if DNA is a code, who or what first taught it how to speak? It's tempting to believe that life created the code, that once the first primitive cells formed, the rest unfolded from there. But there's a deeper possibility that the code came before life, that the code is older than the cell, older than the earth, that it arrived whole, or nearly whole, like a song already written, waiting for an instrument to play it. Some theorists, like those who study the idea of panspermia, wonder if DNA, or a precursor to it, could have originated elsewhere, delivered across space, frozen in comets, shielded in meteorites. Not just the ingredients this time, but the recipe itself. If that's true, then DNA isn't Earth's language. It's the universe's, and we're just one of its poems. But even more curious is this: so much of the code seems unused. Over 90% of the human genome doesn't appear to code for anything. We've called it junk DNA, as if what we don't understand must be meaningless. But maybe it's not junk. Maybe it's memory. Maybe it's scaffolding for something we no longer build, or instructions for conditions that no longer exist, or an archive of lives that were tried and then set aside. A library in a language we haven't yet learned to translate. What if that forgotten DNA carries the blueprints for things we've never seen? Traits we no longer have? Or technologies so biological, so deeply embedded, that they were never meant to be noticed? Because if a species wanted to leave behind a signature, but knew that stone erodes and metal rusts, perhaps they wouldn't carve monuments. Perhaps they'd write a genome, one that could copy itself, change, adapt, one that could hide in plain sight, not on cliffs or in pyramids, but in the skin of every living thing. A code not for control but for continuity. And if so, then maybe we are not the first to read it. Maybe others came before us on other planets in other skies and found their own version of the same language, felt the same wonder at its symmetry, the same confusion at its silence, the same echo of a voice just barely out of reach. Maybe we are not the message. Maybe we are the ones receiving it. And if that's true, then life is not the beginning of the story. It's the reply, a quiet answer spoken back into the dark. Not in words, but in being. And if even a molecule can carry meaning, then what else might carry it? What other materials might still remember? What else might still be speaking? Perhaps the answer isn't in what we hear, but in what's missing. Because sometimes what vanishes tells a deeper story than what survives. We often think of extinction as a tragedy, and it is, a disappearance, a final silence after the last echo fades. But in deep time, extinction is not rare. It is rhythm. It is breath. Earth exhales life, and then, now and again, it holds that breath too long. And the world changes. Species vanish. Ecosystems collapse. Entire branches of life go dark, as if erased. We usually speak of 5 mass extinctions, cataclysms so vast they left scars in stone. But long before the one that killed the dinosaurs, before even the great die-offs of fish or forests, there was a quieter ending. An ancient vanishing, a first extinction, nearly 3 billion years ago, long before bones, before plants, before anything with a nervous system, something extraordinary and deadly happened. Tiny life forms had filled the oceans, feeding on minerals, sunlight, chemical gradients. And some of them began doing something new. They started releasing oxygen. To us, oxygen means life, breath, fire. But to early Earth it was poison, a gas the planet had never known. A change so sudden and wide-reaching that it destroyed nearly everything it touched. The Great Oxidation Event. One of the earliest mass extinctions and perhaps one of the most important. Most life on Earth died, but the planet changed. The sky became blue, the atmosphere shifted, and new forms of life, more complex, more capable, slowly began to appear. Was this just chemistry? A biological accident, scaled across a planet? Or was it something else? What if this wasn't a disaster at all? What if it was a reset? Because to reset something is to choose, to step back from a path and begin again with new parameters, new possibilities. It doesn't erase everything. It reshapes the canvas. And when we look at the Great Oxidation Event through this lens, it stops feeling like a mistake and begins to feel like an edit. Maybe it was a necessary purge, a course correction, a switch pulled not by chaos, but by caretakers, distant minds watching the simulation, tilting it gently toward what might thrive. It would not have required violence, just timing, just placement, a new molecule introduced at the right moment, a catalyst seated in just the right sea. Perhaps oxygen wasn't only a byproduct of biology. Perhaps it was a tool, a signal, a soft bomb set to detonate in slow motion. And what followed was not the end, but the next draft. More stable, more adaptable, more aware. It's unsettling to imagine that life could be guided this way, not through encouragement, but through erasure. But perhaps the architects, if they existed, didn't see extinction the way we do. Perhaps to them, each extinction was not a failure, but a filter. Not cruelty, but calibration. And even today, Earth seems to remember that rhythm. Life surges, then retreats. The fossil record is filled with disappearances. Not just species but whole strategies, entire designs of life that worked until they didn't. The trilobite, the eurypterid, the ancient trees that once reached the sky and then vanished from it. Why did they go? And why, each time, did something more complex rise in their place? Maybe evolution alone explains it. But maybe someone wanted life to climb, to reach higher, to wonder, to remember, and maybe the path to that remembrance had to be cleared again and again. It's not comforting, not really. The idea that we are here because others weren't allowed to be. But it is humbling. It reminds us that Earth is not only a garden, it is also a crucible. A place where memory is shaped by fire, by pressure, by subtraction. And we are the result, not just of survival, but of absence. So the question lingers, if someone or something set the reset switch once, could they do it again? Would we know? Would we hear the warning in time? Or would it come, as it always has, in silence? Perhaps it already has. And if the next chapter of life is waiting to be written, whose hand will lift the pen? And perhaps more curiously, where has that pen already left its mark? Because not all stories are told with words. Some are pressed into matter, laid down in layers, carved by time. And deep beneath our feet, there are pages still turning. Not in books, but in stone. Sedimentary rock is Earth's memory. Each layer a moment, each line a trace of something that once was. Dust from distant deserts, ash from forgotten volcanoes, shells from creatures long dissolved. Over time, these fragments settle. They press together, harden. They become cliffs, valleys, mountains. They become the land we walk on, not knowing that beneath our steps are chapters of a history too old to speak. And yet, the stones remember, not with intention, not like us, but with presence. They hold texture, density, chemistry. They hold patterns that once were processes. They capture the breath of a planet in motion, a planet reacting, changing, trying again. And inside them, if we look closely enough, are stories. Some we understand, ripple marks from ancient shores, fossilized leaves from vanished forests, tracks where a single animal once paused to look behind. But there are other marks, other layers, some too jumbled, some too precise, some too strange. There are formations that resist easy explanation, mineral bands that mimic technology, fossils without ancestry, layers of sudden death, filled with microscopic glass, or rare metals, or isotopic shifts that suggest something powerful, something transformative, occurred. We call these anomalies, outliers, geologic puzzles. But what if they are something more? What if some of them are footprints not of animals but of architects? If a distant intelligence once shaped life on this planet, then perhaps the clearest record of that shaping wouldn't be found in fossils, but in the rocks that buried them. Because sediment doesn't lie. It accumulates, slowly, patiently, one grain at a time, and once sealed, it holds its contents like a jar, untouched for millions of years. What else might be sealed there, still unread? Maybe entire species that came and went before biology stabilized. Maybe synthetic organisms designed for a purpose then retired. Maybe structures not of bone or wood but of something else. Something that doesn't decay in the way we expect. Something we might find and call a mineral when it is really residue. Could the stone be telling us more than we realize? Could certain abrupt shifts in sediment, the sudden appearance of new elements, the strange absence of organic material be signs of intervention? Of a story not just of extinction, but of curation? Because the fossil record is not just a catalog. It is a narrative. And like all narratives, it has gaps, edits, entire periods where time seems to pause, where change halts, or accelerates, as if something or someone was turning a dial. If the planet is a library, then stone is its binding, its archive, but most of it is buried, folded, lost beneath oceans or thrust high in mountains we have yet to climb. Less than 1% of all sedimentary rock is visible. The rest waits, and in that waiting, there may be voices, not in language but in alignment, in chemistry, in sequence. We already use rocks to read the past. We study isotope decay to measure time. We analyze mineral layers to infer temperature, pressure, atmosphere. But what if those tools, those natural mechanisms, were once used by someone else? What if the planet's natural record-keeping was noticed, exploited? Maybe Earth wasn't just seeded with life. Maybe it was also engineered to remember that life, to store it, to preserve it, not in glass or gold or digital code, but in limestone, in shale, in ancient beds of iron and salt and ash. Because stone is not just passive. It reacts, it records, and sometimes it protects. Could there be entire messages buried in the alignment of magnetic grains? Could there be maps encoded in the mineral ratios of distant formations? We may never know, but there's something humbling in the idea that the planet might hold more memory than we do. That the ground itself has witnessed everything. The births, the extinctions, the arrivals and exits of things we cannot name. And while we chase history in scrolls and screens, the Earth keeps its own. Quietly, steadily, in layers so subtle we almost forget to look. Almost. But then, a stone splits, and something impossible falls out. A shape too perfect. A structure without a lineage. A fossil that doesn't fit. And for a moment we wonder, what else lies just beneath the surface? What else might the stone still remember? And sometimes what it remembers is sudden. Rocks are slow storytellers. They whisper of time in layers, gradual, patient, unhurried. But then, there's a page that reads differently. A sharp breath in the fossil record. A bloom, a blink, something quick, bright, and impossible to ignore. We call it the Cambrian explosion. For nearly 3 billion years, life on Earth was simple, microbial, hidden in films and mats and quiet colonies beneath the waves. It was life, yes, but without bones, without shells, without symmetry or sight. Then, roughly 540 million years ago, everything changed. In a geologic instant, just 20 to 25 million years, life exploded into complexity. Not gradually, not slowly, suddenly. Shells appeared, exoskeletons, jaws, eyes, legs, spines. Entire new body plans, dozens of them, emerged in the fossil record almost all at once. Animals that had never existed before, with features that had never been seen, burst into the oceans like ideas remembered too quickly. Why? What changed? Was it simply evolution? Speeding up? Or was something switched on? Some paleontologists say it was oxygen. That after the Great Oxidation event, life finally had the fuel to grow larger, faster, more diverse. Others point to the rise of predators, which forced prey to evolve new strategies, armor, speed, invisibility. A biological arms race. Maybe it was a combination. But even with these explanations, something about the Cambrian still feels strange. Too much, too fast. We see fossils of trilobites with compound eyes, as intricate as those of modern insects, appearing fully formed, not as a blur of gradual steps, but as if built to specification. Some creatures came and vanished in a single blink of deep time, leaving no ancestors, no descendants. Just footprints in stone. Could this have been more than chance? Could it have been an activation? What if the Cambrian explosion wasn't just a result of environmental conditions, but a program dormant for eons finally running its code? Imagine a biological algorithm seated deep in Earth's biosphere, hidden in microbial genomes, waiting for the right signal. Not a message, not a voice, but a chemical key, temperature, a tilt in the planet's axis, a specific ratio of elements in the sea. And then, without warning, life shifts gears. Complexity blooms. Because the blueprint was already there. Not fully written but structured, like scaffolding waiting for a shape. Like a script waiting for a stage. What if early life wasn't building complexity, but unlocking it? Some researchers have suggested that the genetic toolkit for complex bodies, things like limbs, eyes, nervous systems, may have existed long before the Cambrian. Hidden in genes that were repurposed, recombined, expressed differently in response to new conditions. It's called genetic modularity, the idea that life builds itself not from scratch, but from rearranged pieces. like Lego blocks or pre-installed software. But where did that toolkit come from? Why was it so ready, so complete? Could it be that life was designed not just to survive, but to erupt, to unfold in waves, to wait, and then arrive? It wouldn't require magic, just timing, just deep time and patience, just a planet willing to host a code it didn't write, and conditions that, once met, would awaken what had been asleep for billions of years. And maybe that first activation wasn't the only one. Maybe the history of life is a series of unlockings, pulses of complexity triggered by cues we don't yet understand. Maybe we're living in one now, or perhaps we are the program, the latest version, still running. And if that's true, if the Cambrian wasn't just a surge of evolution, but the awakening of something written into the fabric of life itself, then what else lies dormant? What else waits inside the genome, silent, inactive, watching for a threshold we haven't reached, or a key we haven't found? And if so much complexity can emerge in such a short time, what might bloom next? What might already be blooming, softly, quietly, beyond the edge of what we know? Because if complexity can bloom suddenly, if life can unfold like a program triggered from sleep, then we must also ask, who set the program? And if someone did, what might they have left behind? We tend to imagine fossils as the memory of life. Bones, shells, prints left in mud hardened by time. But what if some fossils are not remains of biology, but remnants of something else? Something that shaped biology, and then disappeared? Fossils of forgotten engineers. It's not a phrase you'll find in science textbooks, but the idea lingers, quiet and unresolved, in corners of paleontology. There are fossils that don't quite fit. Structures too symmetrical, too isolated, too sudden in appearance or form. Objects discovered in ancient strata, some older than complex life itself, that look uncomfortably like they were made, not grown, not evolved, made. A series of spheres embedded in South African rock, dated over 2.8 billion years old, perfectly round, grooved, balanced. They've been dismissed as mineral formations, and perhaps they are. But their precision invites questions the rock doesn't answer. In Utah, a fossil known as the Makwi marbles, small, iron-coated nodules found in layers far too ancient for tools. Some are hollow, some nested. Their geometry seems intentional, and yet we call them curiosities. We have to, because what would it mean if they weren't natural? What would it mean if something left behind its messengers, not in metal or script, but in stone? They wouldn't look like machines, not the way we build them. No wires, no screws, no blinking lights, but they might have structure, pattern, function buried inside mineral silence. We assume ancient tools must decay, but what if some were designed to endure, not by resisting time but by becoming part of it? Something built not from steel, but from silicate, not assembled but grown. Could some fossils be these things? Misread, misnamed. Fragments of a toolkit no longer in use or never meant for us to use at all. It wouldn't take much. A single object, embedded in sediment. Its purpose unclear. Its origin uncertain. We might call it a concretion, a misfired growth, a bacterial artifact. But if we looked longer, deeper, would we find encoded complexity? Mineral filaments that mirror organic nerve structures. Repeating ratios that defy randomness. Internal cavities shaped for function, not form. We wouldn't recognize them as machines, because we build machines to do things. But what if the engineers of the early Earth built theirs to be things? To blend, to carry code, to adjust the balance of chemistry, to seed genomes or shift isotopes. Not active robots but passive architects, like spores, like cells, like thoughts placed into matter. And the only way to preserve them was to fossilize them. To embed their designs in the same layers that would one day record trilobites and coral. We speak of the fossil record as a record of life. But maybe it's also a record of intervention, of whispers in stone. Because we don't just find bones in the rock. We find questions. A spiral etched into shale, too regular for coincidence. a pattern repeated in creatures that shared no lineage, a structure that appears in one time, vanishes, and then returns millions of years later, unchanged. Are these echoes of biology, or echoes of design? Some might say we're reading too much into randomness, that patterns will always emerge if you look hard enough, that nature is filled with symmetry because symmetry is efficient. And they may be right, but what if the symmetry was the point? What if the beings who came before biology understood that to leave something behind, they couldn't build monuments? They had to build patterns, recurring shapes, rhythms so subtle we'd only feel them, not see them, clues left not in language, but in repetition. Because repetition endures, it loops, it lingers, and the fossil record is full of loops. Life rises, diversifies, collapses. Species appear, evolve, disappear. But some shapes return, over and over, as if the planet is trying again, or remembering something it once knew. And in the strata between those loops, in the thin layers of ash and silt and pressed time, perhaps something waits, not to be discovered, but to be recognized. A fossil not of life, but of the hand that lit the spark. A message not written in code, but carved in carbon and compression, waiting for us not to decode it, but to realize that it is already part of us. Because if the engineers are gone, and their tools now rest beneath the soil, what else might we inherit from them, without even knowing? What part of us, bone, breath, thought, might still carry their design? And what part of Earth might carry it too? Because if fossils are fragments of memory, then what of the planet itself? What of the stone, the heat, the fractured layers that stretch down miles beneath our feet, pressing against time like a book left open in the dark? Geology is often thought of as slow, indifferent, the background to life, not the storyteller. But what if the Earth is more than backdrop? What if it is witness, not just to what has lived, but to what was done? Fault lines scar the crust, zigzagging across continents like split seams on a garment too long worn. Mountain chains twist upward as if pushed from below. Mineral seams slice cleanly through ancient formations, bearing rare metals, unusual isotopes, heat signatures that shouldn't be there. These aren't always violent signs. Some are elegant, balanced, precise. They read like aftermaths, as if something once moved through, not chaotically but deliberately. Geologists read these marks like testimony. A sudden layer of shocked quartz speaks of an impact. A shift in magnetic orientation suggests the poles have wandered. Strontium ratios in the sediment tell us what rivers carried, and when. And yet, the more we understand, the more we see anomalies. Events too abrupt. Disruptions without clear cause. Changes in climate, pressure, chemistry, not impossible but oddly timed. Synchronized. Like someone edited the planet. Could these edits be evidence? Not of erosion or eruption, but of instruction? We know that planets are shaped from within by mantle plumes, tectonic drift, the slow churn of molten rock. But what if, at some moment in its early history, Earth was also shaped from without? Perhaps not transformed entirely, but tuned, adjusted, prepared. A gardener doesn't build the tree, but may clear the soil, add nutrients, shift the light. What if Earth's geological history was curated in the same way? Not controlled, but guided, sculpted subtly by a presence no longer here, using tools we no longer recognize. Could the banded iron formations, those deep red layers stretching through ancient rock, be more than chemistry? Could they be signs of something igniting the oxygen cycle, nudging life forward? Could the sudden rise in plate tectonics have been prompted, not by accident but by understanding? After all, tectonic drift recycles the crust, regulates temperature, nurtures life. It makes planets breathe. Did someone once help Earth to breathe? We don't need to imagine bulldozers or drilling rigs. This intervention, if it happened, would have moved with quiet force, shaping with intention, not invention. A kind of planetary acupuncture, pressure applied where it matters and then nothing. Let time do the rest. And the Earth, patient as always, remembered, in folded layers of metamorphic rock. in mineral inclusions that trace ancient temperatures, in basalt flows that cooled too evenly, in fault lines that don't quite align. We study these features with scientific eyes, and rightly so. But perhaps science and story are not separate here. Perhaps geology is not just fact, but narrative. A chronicle written in pressure and melt, in silence and break. The rocks do not lie, but they do speak slowly. And beneath their silence is a shape that might not be random. A shape that might be the leftover geometry of a plan not ours. We've always assumed that intelligence leaves behind monuments. But what if the grandest monument left by distant minds wasn't a tower, or a fossil, or a signal? What if it was Earth itself? Not built, but tuned. Not invented, but inherited. And if the crust remembers, if the folds and fractures are more than wounds, if they are testimony, then what are they testifying to? To presence? To purpose? To something we were never meant to know, but never quite able to forget? Because even now, as we tunnel deeper, drill further, measure more finely than ever before, the Earth continues to whisper. Through isotopes, through quartz, through the soft heat rising from the mantle like breath from a sleeping giant. And if this is testimony, then what is the next question? What else might the planet be waiting to reveal? Maybe nothing, or maybe everything. If Earth holds memory, then time holds erosion. Time holds forgetting. Nothing escapes it, not truly. Everything fades. Everything shifts. And the longer it has been, the more difficult it becomes to know what was once clear. The sharp lines soften. The evidence dissolves. Not all at once. Not with noise. But slowly in the language of entropy. Entropy is the great unraveler. It's the whisper at the end of every system. The slow drift from order to disorder. No matter how carefully something is built, a structure, a body, a story, entropy will come. Not to destroy, but to scatter, to blur. And if there were once signatures left behind, perhaps that's where they've gone. If alien minds once visited this planet, if they sculpted the biosphere, activated the genome, tuned the crust, entropy would have worked against them from the very start. Stone cracks, carbon breaks down, metal oxidizes, DNA mutates, and meaning, whatever meaning once existed, begins to dissolve. It would take no violence, no cover-up, just time. And time, as always, is patient. But even in decay, not all order disappears. There are patterns that resist, shapes that echo longer than they should, ratios that recur even after their purpose is gone. Like footprints in a riverbed long dried, they remain, not fully, not perfectly, but enough to suggest that something once moved through here. And sometimes those patterns are too clean, too persistent. We see them in biology, symmetry that reemerges across species that never met. A spiral in the cochlea of the ear that mirrors the spiral in galaxies. The fractal branching of trees, lungs, rivers. These could be chance. Nature loves efficiency, but still, the repetition stirs something. A familiarity we didn't expect to find. We see it in geology, too. In crystalline structures that replicate with mathematical precision. In mineral alignments that suggest intention, but defy explanation. In isotopic distributions that hint at an origin outside the expected chain of decay. Could these be the fading fingerprints of ancient intervention? The echoes of tools too advanced or too biological to leave traditional debris? If we imagine that alien minds once touched Earth, we must also imagine that they understood entropy. That they knew how quickly their presence would dissolve. And so perhaps they didn't try to leave messages in metal or glyphs, but in pattern. Because pattern lasts longer than material. A message encoded in symmetry doesn't need to survive as an object. Can persist as a tendency, as a pressure in probability. A whisper in randomness that gently favors one shape over another. Over time, that shape repeats again, until it becomes part of the background, and then one day is noticed again. Not because it's loud, but because it's still there. Could it be that the persistence of certain forms, in matter, in life, in thought, is itself a kind of signal? Not a beacon in the sky, but a quiet resistance to entropy, a signature that refuses to vanish. Maybe the engineers, if they were real, knew that their time would be short, that entropy would blur every tool, every trace, every careful curve of their craft. So they wrote their memory into recurrence, into self-similarity, into the rhythms of geology, biology, and the physics that bind them. They didn't say we were here. They said you will feel us long after we are gone. And we do, in ways we can't quite name. A fossil too precise, a structure too early, code too elegant, a silence that hums. It's not proof, not in the way we usually demand it, but it is something stubborn, something still visible in the deep erosion of time. Because entropy may scatter the pieces, but it cannot always erase the arrangement. The story may blur, but the cadence lingers. And maybe that's how we'll know, not by discovering a monument, but by recognizing a melody. A quiet harmony beneath the chaos, too constant to be chance. And if entropy is the tide that tries to wash the memory away, maybe we are the shore. Maybe it's up to us to notice what the sea has tried to smooth, and to ask gently, what else is still resisting? What other patterns, subtle and quiet, might still be waiting to be read? Not because they were left for us, but because they are part of us. And perhaps no part runs deeper than the ones we carry in every cell, hidden not in stone or sky, but inside us, whispering from within, quietly fueling the story of life, without ever asking to be noticed. The mitochondria, tiny organelles, often called the powerhouses of the cell. But they are more than that. They are relics. They are echoes. They are survivors of an ancient event so strange, so fundamental, that we still don't fully understand it. Once, long ago, before plants, before animals, before bones or blood, a simple cell engulfed another. A single act. One organism swallowed another. And instead of digestion, something else happened. A merger. The swallowed cell, rather than being destroyed, stayed. It adapted. It helped. It offered energy, efficient, reliable energy, and in return it was sheltered, protected. The two became one. A new kind of life was born. Eukaryotic life. Complex. Capable of becoming multicellular. Capable of becoming us. And that inner guest, that ancient presence, it became the mitochondrion. But it is not just a piece of us. It is a puzzle. Mitochondria have their own DNA separate from the nucleus, circular like bacteria, primitive yet specialized. Their structure suggests ancestry, but not lineage. A fragment of another story grafted into ours. How did it happen? Why did it happen? And was it truly an accident? We call it endosymbiosis, the theory that mitochondria began as free-living organisms, merged by chance into a larger host. It's a beautiful idea, but it raises as many questions as it answers. Why was this merger so successful, so rare, and yet so essential? Why did it happen just once, or so rarely that we've only ever seen its trace in one tree of life? Could it be that this was not just a lucky mistake, but a moment of manipulation? A biological intervention? A quiet gift from somewhere else? Because if you were a civilization capable of seeding life across the stars, if you wanted to offer a spark, not to dominate but to catalyze, wouldn't you place your gift not in the sky, but inside the cell? Wouldn't you build something small, self-replicating, durable? Wouldn't you build a mitochondrion? It is, in many ways, a nanomachine. It converts fuel into usable energy through a delicate process called oxidative phosphorylation. It manages its own genes. It multiplies independently. It signals. It adapts. And it carries echoes. Inside its double membrane, within its spiral folds, are whispers of another world. Its DNA is short, but its story is long. Its behavior is precise, as if designed for a role it never quite forgot. It doesn't control the cell, but it empowers it. What if that was the point? To give Earth's early cells the energy they needed to grow, to allow complexity to rise, to unlock the possibility of thought. Maybe the architects, if they existed, didn't intervene with grand gestures or artificial species. Maybe they offered something small, a biological ignition key, a seed not of life, but of possibility. And maybe mitochondria are the vessel they left behind. Not conscious, not intelligent, but engineered long ago, far away, by minds who understood that biology is the language the universe prefers. And we, unknowing, have carried that language ever since. Passed from mother to child, for mitochondria are inherited only maternally, a pure line of energy stretching back to the dawn of complex life. Generation after generation, a quiet inheritance, not of memory perhaps, but of motion, of power, of a story still unfolding. And if we listen closely, maybe we can hear it, not in sound, but in rhythm, in the way the mitochondria hum inside our cells, trillions of tiny engines keeping time with a program written before we ever dreamed. They are not ours alone. They are older. They are other. And yet, they are within us. So we ask, who gave them? And if it was not chance, then what else, buried deep within biology, might also be a gift? What else might we have mistaken for natural, when it was always deliberate? What else might we carry, without ever having known? Perhaps not just within us, but around us, in the air that moves, the warmth that stays, the chill that comes and goes. Because what if the climate is not entirely its own? We often think of weather as chaos, and in many ways it is. The winds change, the temperatures rise, the rains come late. Climate is the long memory of this restlessness. Decades, centuries, millions of years of motion and warmth and cold, recorded in ice cores and isotopes and the rings of trees long buried. But what if that memory is not entirely natural? What if it's not just atmosphere responding to ocean, or volcanoes clouding the sky, or orbits slowly tilting with cosmic rhythm? What if something nudged it, not controlled it, not ruled it, but shaped it softly, gently over time? Earth's climate is a system, vast, complex, interlinked. And yet, it has remained, for all its dramatic swings, within a certain range. Hot enough to allow life, cold enough to preserve it. A planet balanced on a narrow beam between frozen silence and boiling ruin. It's a miracle, we often say. But is it? Or is it management? Life needs climate to survive, yes, but it also needs climate to change. Without change, there is no pressure, no selection, no need to adapt. And so the Earth has changed, again and again. Ice ages and hothouses, droughts and deluges, each one pushing life into new forms. Could these pulses of temperature and atmosphere have been natural triggers? Or could they have been designed? We don't mean weather machines, not satellites or switches, but something older, something more elegant. Climate shaped not with force, but with foresight. Perhaps the engineers, if they existed, didn't place life and walk away. Perhaps they stayed invisibly as climate curators, embedding subtle levers into the system. Methane trapped in permafrost, sulfur loops from oceanic bacteria, the slow dance of carbon through air, tree, stone, and sea. Mechanisms we already study, feedback loops we already map. But could some of these loops have been placed intentionally, seeded into Earth's systems to tilt the balance ever so slightly when the moment was right? Maybe an extra eruption here, a cooling current there, a spike in oxygen, a veil of dust. Not dramatic interventions, but soft edits, course corrections, a subtle architecture of pressure and release. And if that's true, then life may not have evolved merely through struggle. It may have been guided through it. The great oxygenation, the snowball Earth events, the Permian greenhouse, the slow thawing and warming that led to mammals, then minds. Each one, a step, a page turned, the climate shifting not just because of Earth, but because of an invisible gardener adjusting the light. It would take patience. It would take a kind of time we rarely imagine. Not centuries, not even millennia, but eons. A will that thinks in continents, in tectonics, in atmospheres. But maybe that's what makes it beautiful. That life is not just an accident of temperature, but a conversation with it. An unfolding guided not only by DNA and dust, but by degrees, by pressure, by wind. And maybe we've misunderstood what climate truly is. Not just environment but influence. Not just backdrop, but brushstroke. We already know it changes us. Shapes our migrations, our food, our culture. But perhaps it shaped more than that. Perhaps climate was the silent hand behind extinction and emergence. Behind mutation and memory. A planetary metronome, tuned by minds long gone. Or never gone at all. Because even now, the climate changes. Not slowly, not this time. And whether by us or through us, the earth warms. And life will shift again. But maybe that, too, is part of the script. Or maybe we are beginning to hold the pen. And if we are, whose story are we continuing? And what temperatures were meant to come next? Or more softly, what questions were meant to come next? Because even as life unfolded, even as climates shifted and forms emerged from the sea, the story of how we came to be, bone, thought, memory, has always felt almost right. Almost complete. But not entirely. And maybe that's where wonder lives. In the almost. We are taught that life evolved. And in so many ways, it did. The logic is beautiful. Variation, selection, inheritance. It explains how limbs became wings, how fins became feet, how something small and blind became something curious enough to stare at stars. Darwin's idea is not broken, it breathes. But even the most elegant theories have shadows. Places where the light doesn't quite reach. Biology, for all its answers, has blind spots. Spaces it cannot fully explain, or chooses to pass over quickly, hoping we won't linger too long. But what if we did? What if we slowed down and looked gently into those gaps? There are species that defy their place in the tree. Creatures that appear in the fossil record too suddenly, with no clear ancestors, no transitional forms. We call these punctuations, accelerations, but they feel more like arrivals. And then there are the organs, complex, intricate, seemingly overbuilt for their function. The human brain, far more powerful than survival requires. Why such excess? Why such capacity for abstraction, music, memory, grief? Evolution doesn't demand poetry. Yet here we are, dreaming in metaphor, weeping at stories, building instruments we don't need. Why? And in the deep record of genetics, we find another strangeness. Parts of the genome that have no clear purpose. Entire sequences that don't code for anything, not protein, not function, not form. Junk DNA, we once called it. But what kind of system, sculpted by natural pressure, keeps so much of what it doesn't use? Maybe it's not junk. Maybe it's scaffolding. Or backup. Or memory. There are instincts in animals that emerge unlearned. Birds who navigate by stars they've never seen. Eels who find the same river across an ocean they've never crossed. How does evolution pass down geography? How does it install maps in minds? We don't know. There are behaviors we mimic across the animal kingdom. Sacrifice, deception, ritual, even empathy. Are these just adaptations? Or are they echoes? Scripts inherited not just through blood, but through something older? Something encoded? Biology gives us the tools to survive. But does it give us the tools to ask why? Does it account for the ache we feel for origins, for purpose, for something beyond the hunger of the body? Darwin was mostly right, but maybe not entirely. Maybe there is a layer beneath evolution, a quiet architecture that shaped the path life could take, not with control but with constraint. Not like an author, but like a gardener choosing which seeds to sow, which soil to prepare. Maybe some features of life are too strange to be accidents, and too gentle to be designs. Maybe they are suggestions, nudges, soft invitations toward complexity. And in those blind spots, speculation isn't foolish, it's necessary. It's where science and story begin to overlap. It's where imagination becomes a tool, not for distraction, but for discovery. Because every question we've answered about biology has led to more. And the places we still do not understand, the sudden jumps, the ancient genes, the overbuilt systems, may be pointing toward something we've only just begun to consider. That life is not only adaptive, it is responsive. That biology is not only shaped by survival, but also by mystery. And if there are blind spots, if evolution stumbles or hesitates, or leaves behind traces of something we cannot name, Perhaps those are the places where another hand was present. Not to sculpt, but to invite. Not to control, but to guide. So we ask, what else might be hiding in those gaps? What else have we mistaken for randomness, when it was always the quiet shape of something more? And if biology still carries echoes of a deeper instruction, one we've yet to translate, what happens when we learn to read it? Or, what happens if we already are? Or if we've always been reading a story that didn't begin at the surface? Because not all mysteries are written in stars or bones. Some are hidden in darkness, in pressure, in silence. We often imagine life beginning in the light, shallow waters warmed by sun, where minerals swirled in tidal and chance sparked chemistry. That story is familiar, comfortable, but increasingly, scientists are looking elsewhere, deeper, into places not warmed by light, but by heat, into oceans not at the shore, but at the edge of the world, into the deep, where vents split the seafloor, and black columns of mineral-rich water rise like slow breath from the planet's lungs. Here, in total darkness, life exists, thrives, not by photosynthesis but through something older, chemosynthesis. Bacteria that feed on sulfur, on hydrogen, on the raw ingredients of geology. Worms that glow, crabs that see without seeing. Forests of creatures adapted not to warmth, but to pressure, to chemical tides, to a world without sky. These vents are not recent, they are ancient, and around them, some of the oldest branches of life still cling. Primitive, alien, resilient. Some believe that this is where life began. But what if it didn't begin? What if it was placed? Because the deep ocean is the perfect hiding place. Protected from UV radiation. Shielded from asteroid impacts. Stable across eons. If you wanted to start life without interruption, to give it time to root, to test its chemistry, the abyss would be ideal. There, in the folds of the Earth's crust, it could grow in secret, unobserved, unbothered, and perhaps unrecognizable. We often assume that the oldest life was simple. But what if the life that came first was complex in ways we don't understand? What if we've only found the descendants and not the source? Could there be traces of prebiotic structures still clinging to vents beneath the sea? Not fossils but functions. Not cells but scaffolds. Frameworks of patterns seeded into the environment, designed to shape biology from the bottom up. We already know the vents create structure. Minerals assemble into hollow chimneys. Iron sulfide membranes with pores, gradients, compartments, conditions eerily similar to early cells. Some researchers call this metabolism first, the idea that life began not with genes, but with flow, energy gradients that organize matter long before replication. But what if those membranes were more than chemistry? What if they were templates, placed, shaped, left behind? Not machines, not organisms, something in between. The third thing, a cradle, the first womb. And like all good cradles, it was designed to be forgotten. We wouldn't see it now. It would have eroded, transformed, integrated into the crust. The original material gone, its purpose fulfilled. But its signature, its design, might still echo in the chemistry of life. In how cells build membranes. In how proteins fold. In how energy moves across gradients. All of it echoes. And maybe that's the point. The deep ocean doesn't reveal its secrets quickly. Even now, we've explored only a fraction of it. Its trenches are deeper than mountains are tall. Its pressure is immense. Its cold endless. And yet life endures there, in places no sunlight reaches, in forms that seem less like descendants of the surface, and more like survivors of something else. Something older. Something original. If alien minds wanted to seed life discreetly, not to impress but to initiate, this is where they'd do it. Not in orbit, not in ruins, but in the rift, in the places Earth already breathes. And if they did, they wouldn't need to come back. They'd let the vents do the work. They'd let time unfold. And maybe, just maybe, they'd leave one or two clues behind. Something subtle. A molecule that folds too perfectly. A mineral that shouldn't exist. A structure that mimics purpose. Not proof, just possibility. And when we look into the dark, Into that black water laced with fire, we feel it, that something is there, not watching, but waiting. And the deeper we go, the more we must ask, have we mistaken the ocean for emptiness? When all along, it was the cradle. And if life was cradled, nurtured, set quietly into motion, not by accident, but by unseen hands, then what of those hands? Where did they go? If the engineers once came, to seed, to sculpt, to step back, then why is there no trace of their leaving? We find no monuments, no transmissions, no machinery rusting in the soil, only patterns, only chemistry, only the feeling, faint and persistent, that something moved here long ago, and then vanished. So we ask, who were they, and why didn't they stay? Maybe they were explorers, not conquerors but caretakers, minds not of metal and war, but of subtlety, of distance, of long memory. Beings who looked at the young earth not as a resource, but as a garden, not to claim, but to grow. The idea is strange, but not absurd. We've sent our own probes out into the dark, seeded metal into space, carrying instructions, maps, whispers of who we are. Would we do the same with biology? Would we send the tools of life, tucked inside a comet, drifting through time? Maybe we already have, and maybe they did too. But if they watched us grow, they did so in silence. Or perhaps they left before we began. Their part in the story finished the moment the recipe was stable. After all, a gardener does not stand over every leaf. They step away. They let the rain and soil and sun take over. And perhaps that's all Earth ever needed. A single act of kindness, placed deep in the oceans or under the crust, and then patience. But still, it's hard not to wonder where they are now. Gone? Evolved beyond bodies? Moved on to other worlds? Leaving Earth as one chapter among many? Or are they still here? Not watching, but dreaming. Not distant, but diffused, not a species anymore, but a signal. Maybe the engineers became their own creation. Maybe they poured themselves into biology, not to be remembered, but to be lived. Not as gods, but as pattern, as DNA, as breath, as instinct. Maybe we carry them not in history, but in habit. In the way life rises again after every extinction. In the way matter leans toward complexity. In the way we feel pulled toward meaning, as if memory is not something we store, but something we are. Would they need anything more? Would they want anything more? If their purpose was continuity, not control, then vanishing would be the goal. To disappear so completely that even speculation feels like a reaching hand in the dark. And yet, we keep reaching, because we feel them, or the idea of them, in the stars, in the oceans, in the strange precision of the genome, in the quiet pulse of the planet beneath our feet. Not as myth, not as science, but as possibility. It humbles us, not to imagine we were made, but to imagine we were helped. That the universe is not indifferent, but participatory. That life is not a solitary spark, but part of something ongoing. Project, pattern, promise. And if that promise was tended by minds older than memory, then perhaps vanishing was not disappearance, but transformation. The engineers are gone. Or, the engineers are. In everything. In us. And if so, what happens when we begin to remember them? What happens when we stop looking for faces in the sky and start listening for echoes inside? Or perhaps beneath? Because not all traces are written in DNA. Some are etched into stone, into the very materials that shape the world around us. Crystals, magnetism, isotopes, not tools in the way we think of them, no gears, no glass, no humming wires, but structures so refined, so quietly perfect, they may not be natural at all. What if some technologies are too old to be recognized? Too patient, too still? We think of technology as loud, mechanical arms, flashing lights, machines built for speed and function. But the further we advance, the quieter our tools become. Circuits shrink. Code becomes invisible. Information hides in light, in vibration, in pattern. So what of a civilization far older, far more advanced? Would their tools look like ours? Or would they look like nature? There are crystals that grow with geometric precision, as if they've memorized a blueprint. Quartz that resonates when pressed, as though it remembers pressure and time. Magnetic fields that fluctuate in ways we struggle to predict despite knowing the math. And deep in the crust, there are isotopic anomalies, shifts in the balance of matter, traces of events we cannot trace. Uranium deposits too refined. Xenon ratios that don't quite add up. They appear natural. But what does natural mean when technology can mimic it perfectly? Arthur C. Clarke once said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. But perhaps it's also indistinguishable from geology. Imagine a civilization that understood not just physics, but the deep patience of planetary systems. One that built not with metal but with mineral. That shaped time itself into its machines, slow machines, subsurface machines, machines that don't move but endure, not launched into orbit, but embedded beneath. Some scientists wonder if technosignatures, clues of advanced life, might hide in the form of isotopic shifts too precise to be chance. Ratios of stable elements that suggest enrichment, control. Not radioactive waste. Not noise, but patterns. Systems. Could some of these patterns already lie buried in Earth? Could they be remnants of systems that managed ecosystems, stabilized climate, nudged evolution? Or perhaps observed? Would we notice if the planet was wrapped in a sensor net? One not built from satellites, but from tuned minerals, scattered deposits, resonant frequencies placed eons ago. Sounds like fiction, but so once did flight, and light-borne information, and DNA as a storage system. We now build data centers inside stone. Use quantum fields to communicate. If our own species is beginning to vanish its machines into material, then what of others millions of years ahead? What would their memory look like? Perhaps it wouldn't be kept in books or chips. Perhaps it would hum through magnetic seams, encode itself in lattice structures, flicker subtly through auroras, through crustal vibrations, through rhythms of decay too slow to notice. Maybe the machines were never meant to move. Maybe they were meant to blend, to last, to watch. Some crystals exhibit piezoelectricity. They generate voltage when compressed. Others can hold charge for millennia. Could they be components? Could some of Earth's most inert-seeming substances be long-silenced devices? Not broken, but completed. Their function fulfilled. Their signal sent. Or maybe they're still working. Maybe they were never made to speak loudly. Maybe they only whisper. We'd have to listen differently. Not with antennas, but with humility, with new questions. What is this quartz doing here so deep and so alone? Why does this iron band resonate just so? Why does this isotope occur in a ratio unpredicted by time? We don't yet know how to read these things, or if there's anything to read at all. But that's the quiet wonder of it, the possibility that the most sophisticated messages ever placed on Earth are not buried in ruins or scratched into stone walls, but are the stone walls, are the frequencies, the spins, the resonance itself. Technologies older than time, or older at least than our time. And if they're still here, still humming, still remembering, then maybe the Earth itself is not just alive. Maybe it's aware. Maybe the planet is not only a garden, but a device. And we, breath, thought, curiosity, are part of what it was designed to grow. And perhaps also part of what it was designed to remember. Because memory doesn't always require minds. Sometimes it only needs layers. Stillness. Cold. Sometimes memory is frozen. High in the glaciers and deep beneath the polar sheets there are bubbles. Tiny spheres of ancient air, trapped in ice older than our species. Oxygen, carbon, dust. Sealed away like breath held in silence, waiting for someone to listen. We drill into that ice carefully like archaeologists of atmosphere. We measure the carbon ratios, the trapped methane, the ash from volcanic eruptions so old they have no names. Each layer, each frozen flake, is a page of Earth's autobiography. Brittle, beautiful, and heartbreakingly precise. And yet, even now, we're only beginning to read it. What if we've misunderstood what ice is? Not just frozen water. Not just climate record. But storage. A vault. A memory drive built not by us but by time, or perhaps by something that knew time would be needed. Because ice does more than preserve. It separates. It silences. Keeps still what should not be lost. And perhaps some of what it keeps still was never meant to be found easily. Scientists can now read the climate story back hundreds of thousands of years. They can watch the slow rise and fall of temperatures, of greenhouse gases, of isotopic fluctuations. They see rhythms, cycles, the breath of a planet. But sometimes what they see feels strange. Abrupt jumps, sudden shifts, warming that arrives too quickly, cooling that lingers too long. Not random, not smooth, disrupted. And we wonder, could these disruptions be messages? Or corrections? Was the ice meant to hold the evidence? Or was it meant to be the evidence? If the climate has been nudged, gently guided over deep time as we've wondered before, then the ice is where those nudges leave fingerprints. Changes in elemental composition, particulate matter from unknown origins, layers of ash or soot or something else entirely, something unclassified. What if those layers weren't just the byproduct of Earth's moods, but the result of decisions? Subtle interventions, lightly placed adjustments. Could someone have calibrated the atmosphere, tuned it like an instrument, and left the record not in writing but in snowfall? Because snow forgets nothing, settles, seals, and waits. And unlike soil or stone, ice doesn't compress memory into hardness. Suspends it, gently, softly, like breath caught mid-sentence, like time paused then buried. Could ice hold more than air? Could it carry life? Dormant microbes, ancient molecules, even messages encoded in structure, in symmetry, in frequency. We already know ice can preserve genetic material, that it can trap viruses, pollen, whispers of things that lived long before our memory began. So what else could it be holding? And more importantly, what melts when it melts? What knowledge is lost when a glacier breaks? What messages spill back into oceans and sky, unrecognized, unrecovered? Maybe we're melting more than ice. Maybe we're melting memory. And maybe some of that memory wasn't left by Earth, but for Earth. Clues from climates altered not just by volcanism or solar cycles, but by quiet intention. A nudge here, a balance there. And then, like all caretakers who trust what they've planted, they stepped away, letting the ice remember what they could not stay to explain. And now, as the planet warms, and the layers crack and fall into sea, we are listening. Late perhaps, but listening. And if the ice speaks, not in sound, but in chemistry, in ratios, in whispers trapped in crystalline pause, then what does it say? And more softly still, what else might be buried, deeper still, waiting for us to find it before it's gone? Because not all memory is preserved. Some of it is erased. But even erasure leaves a shape, a silence where something once was, a pause in the rhythm, a missing chapter in the book of life. And the deeper we read into the fossil record, the more we notice those chapters are not scattered at random. They come in waves, in collapses, in endings. 5 times, at least, the world has ended. Not entirely, but almost. The Ordovician, the Devonian, the Permian, the Triassic, the Cretaceous. 5 mass extinctions, each one different, each one sudden in the language of geology, and each one a turning point, a door closing so that something new might emerge on the other side. We call them catastrophes, but what if they were punctuation? Marks in a story not written all at once, but slowly, across eons. Events that feel like endings, but that might have been part of a rhythm, a message, a pattern too large to see from inside it. What if extinction is not always failure, but function? We know that extinction resets ecosystems, that it opens space for what comes next. When the dinosaurs vanished, mammals flourished. When marine life collapsed, reefs were rebuilt from scratch. When plants disappeared, forests came back differently, taller, quieter, more complex. It's almost curated, as though each extinction wasn't the end of a page, but a careful tear. A pause. A deliberate breath. Some scientists speak of background extinction, the slow, constant drift of species fading as conditions change. But mass extinction is different. It's sharp, global. Something intervenes. An asteroid, a volcano, a shift in carbon, and life changes, not just in form, but in direction. Could those interventions have been intentional? Not the events themselves, perhaps, but their timing. If there were minds ancient, vast, quiet, watching over the long history of Earth, would they have found ways to course-correct? To adjust complexity without starting over? Extinction not as punishment, but as pruning, as punctuation in a story still being written. We already prune forests to help them grow. Could the same be true for life? What if extinction is a kind of language? Not the language of death, but of editing. A system through which biology evolves not just randomly, but responsively. Resetting itself when the code becomes too tangled. When possibilities narrow. When new forms are needed to adapt to a changing world, or to a world meant to change. Could the Permian extinction, the largest of them all, have been such a reset? Wiping away nearly everything, clearing space for new forms of metabolic life? Could the Cretaceous impact have been more than a tragedy, but a spark? A deliberate silence so that a new voice could rise? We may never know, but the fossil record tells us that life doesn't just continue after extinction. It expands. It innovates. It remembers differently. And maybe that's the point. Extinction rewrites the script. It allows the planet to speak in a new tone, to explore new sentences. And maybe, just maybe, someone once understood that, knew how to guide it, not by force but by timing, by gentle interjections, a shift in orbit, a plume of dust, a signal embedded in the crust. We've always assumed that extinction is blind, but maybe it blinks. Maybe it sees more than we can imagine. And if extinction is a kind of punctuation, then what kind of sentence are we in now? Is our age a comma? A semicolon? Or something heavier? We're changing the world rapidly. Melting the ice, warming the seas, silencing the forests. We fear collapse. We feel it approaching. But what if collapse is part of the syntax? What if we are not the authors, but the language itself? And the story continues with or without us. That's not despair. The scale. It's humility. It's the realization that life, all life, may be part of something older and quieter than we've ever allowed ourselves to believe. A story written not by chance, but by choice. And if so, then what's the next chapter? What silence waits ahead? And what form might memory take after we are gone? Maybe not metal, not digital, not enduring in the ways we wish it would. Maybe it becomes something far quieter, something that slips between fingers, something we've already touched 1,000 times without knowing what it once was. Sand. We don't think of sand as meaningful. It's what we walk on, what blows through wind, what slips away in tides. But sand is the end of structure, the soft conclusion of stone, of form, of memory, and perhaps of civilizations. Because erosion doesn't care what a thing once was. A building, a bone, a boundary. Given enough time, all are reduced to dust, to particles, to grains stripped of context. What once held weight becomes silence. What once reached upward becomes a field of formlessness. We look at deserts and think of absence. But perhaps they are archives, not of what's there now, but of what was once arranged there with intention. Could sand be the afterlife of lost architecture? Could entire civilizations, alien or engineered, be ground back into dust so thoroughly, so patiently, that nothing of their pattern remains? We often imagine ruins as eternal, that if something mattered, it would leave behind monuments, skeletons, echoes. But entropy works softly. It doesn't demolish. It wears down. Stone becomes cracked. Symbols become blurred. And one day the meaning is gone, even if the material remains. And if enough time passes, even the material surrenders. Quartz fractures. Marble flakes. Cities turn to grains. Sand doesn't record what it came from. You can't look at a beach and see the statue it once was. But still, you feel something in the vastness, something hidden in the repetition, a former arrangement, forgotten. It's possible, just possible, that this has happened before. Not once. Not only here. What if Earth has hosted not just life but culture? Not just organisms, but organized thought? Species that built, wrote, wandered, dreamed, and then vanished. Not in war, not in fire, but in time. Ground into anonymity by tide, rain, wind, and pressure. Folded back into sediment. Sifted until no edges remain. If such civilizations existed, alien, ancient, or even seeded by design, would we know? We've barely scratched the surface of our own planet. Beneath forests, under oceans, across deserts, there are structures we haven't yet found. And even those we do find, we sometimes misunderstand. A circle of stone mistaken for a natural formation. A ruin mistaken for a rock. And then, deeper still, nothing. Just sand. But what if some of that sand was once arranged? What if some landscapes are not just geological but archaeological? Not because of what we can see, but because of what has already been erased. Because erasure is a kind of signal if we're quiet enough to hear it. A missing layer. A patch of soil that doesn't belong. An inexplicable symmetry in the hills. Subtle. Faint. Easily missed. But not meaningless. We've found cities beneath cities. We've found temples beneath fields. We've found footprints beneath volcanic ash. Always deeper. Always older than we expected. So we ask, how far back does forgetting go? And if something was built 1,000,000 years ago, with tools unfamiliar, with materials too fragile to survive, could it have existed, fully, beautifully, and still leave nothing behind but a shift in the sand? And if we disappeared today, what would remain? Glass would shatter. Steel would rust. Satellites would fall. Our cities would become gardens, then forests, then dust. In 10,000 years, there would be questions. In 1,000,000, there would be speculation. In 10,000,000, there would be only sediment. Maybe someone will wonder if we were ever here. Maybe they will find a pattern in the stone. A hint. A strange concentration of isotopes. A faint trace of plastic, or aluminum, or concrete turned brittle. Maybe they will wonder if that layer, that faint line of rearranged earth, once held shape. And maybe they will ask the same thing we're asking now. Could civilizations come and go like tides? Could intention vanish into geology? Could sand? Remember? Not in message, not in code, but in its silence, in what it used to hold, and what it no longer needs to say, because not all messages are written in stone. Some are written in time. We think of time as simple, a line, a flow, a river we're carried through without asking. It moves in one direction, slow and constant. Things grow old. Things decay. The past slips away and the future waits, always just out of reach. But what if time isn't a river? What if it's clay? What if it can be shaped? To us, time feels fixed, but physics suggests otherwise. General relativity tells us that time bends, that gravity can stretch it, slow it, fold it. Near a black hole, a second can last an eternity. In a high orbit, clocks tick faster than they do on Earth. Time is not absolute. It's responsive, mutable. And if the universe allows time to be shaped, could someone have shaped it? If the architects, the quiet minds who may have sculpted life on this world, were as advanced as we imagine, then perhaps their greatest tool was not material but time itself. Not to travel through, but to embed meaning within. We use paper and stone and digital code to hold information. But time holds memory in a different way, through wear, through erosion, through transformation. And maybe, just maybe, the architects knew that decay itself could become a language. Not destruction, instruction. A seed placed in biology might not bloom right away. It might need time, heat, pressure, mutation, extinction. Instructions activated not by touch, but by change, by waiting. Evolution, then, might not be blind. It might be a long unfolding of something placed long ago, designed to emerge only when the time was right. We already know cells can carry dormant information. Genes turned off for generations, waiting for stress or environment to switch them back on. What else lies waiting? What else might be time-locked, coded into silence until the clock says now? And perhaps time was used not just to deliver biology, but to obscure it, to hide evidence, to blur origins, to protect fragile patterns from being discovered too soon or by the wrong hands. Entropy does most of the work, but entropy too follows laws, and if those laws were understood deeply enough, maybe they could be used, not to stop decay, but to harness it, to shape how things disappear, to leave behind only what matters, to bury knowledge beneath layers of forgetting. Could certain events in Earth's past, extinctions, bloomings, sudden shifts in climate or consciousness, have been timed? Not random, but arranged? Not predicted, but encouraged? A planet doesn't need wires to be programmed. It only needs rhythm, a long, patient loop that plays out over millions of years. Maybe even the stars were part of it. Their positions, their pulses, their occasional bursts of radiation. Triggers, not accidents. Time signatures written across space, designed to unlock biological events only when the sky itself aligned. We call it deep time, but maybe it's deeper than we know. And maybe the architects didn't leave behind monuments because they didn't need to. Maybe they knew that if they shaped time correctly, if they wove their purpose into the unfolding of matter itself, the world would carry forward what they began. Not with awareness, but with momentum, with inertia, like a clock set ticking and left alone. We assume intelligence acts quickly, but maybe true intelligence moves slowly, like glaciers, like planets, like time. And if they use time as a tool, not just to hide, but to heal, to steer, to soften the jagged edges of chaos, then maybe we're not alone in our passage. Maybe we're being carried, not by fate, but by design, not forced, but encouraged, not commanded, but timed. And if that's true, then what moments are still waiting to unfold? What instructions lie ahead? What transformations are already written into the coming centuries? Not by us, but by something older, something woven through the timeline itself. Something that knew we'd arrive, knew we'd wonder, knew we'd ask. What else has time been made to hold? Maybe not just instructions. Not only the blueprints for life or the timing of its bloom. Maybe Earth holds something more than that. Maybe it remembers. Not the way we do, not in language, not in images or dreams, but in fields, in folds, in pressure and pull. In the quiet records written by mass and motion. Because some believe that planets, like people, carry memory deep inside them. And Earth has depth. Beneath the crust lies mantle, and beneath the mantle a core, hot, spinning, alive with motion. This motion generates magnetism, a field that surrounds the planet, shifting, rippling, protecting. Some call it the magnetosphere. But what if it's more than protection? What if it's memory? A soft circuit looping through the planet, humming with electromagnetic information. We already know that the magnetosphere changes, flips, weakens, rebuilds, that animals can sense it, that particles from the sun dance along its lines and leave traces. But perhaps it's more than a shield. Perhaps it's a system, a repository, and what it holds is not just charge, but pattern. Could the Earth's magnetic field be part of how it remembers its own past? Gravity, too, moves like a whisper through the body of the planet, not just pulling but flexing. Waves ripple through rock when tectonic plates collide, and those waves leave marks. Subtle, invisible, but stored. Every earthquake is a recording, every fault line a scribe. And if we think of memory as recurrence, as the ability to repeat a pattern, then Earth is full of it. Cycles of temperature, cycles of magnetism, the slow waltz of orbital mechanics, the pulse of tides drawn by the moon. Repetition is remembering. And if a planet can remember through rhythm, what else might it recall? Could Earth carry echoes of beings that once touched it? Not in stone, but in field, not in fossil, but in frequency. Maybe memory doesn't need to be stored in matter. Maybe it can hum through space, linger in magnetic anomalies, settle in gravity wells like sediment in water. Some even wonder if certain locations on Earth feel different, not because of myth, but because of magnetism. Not because of history, but because something in the field is still humming. Stone circles, sacred mountains, places that feel like thresholds. Maybe they are. Maybe they were shaped not only by humans, but by the planet itself responding to a signal it once knew. There are parts of Earth where magnetism is strange, where compasses spin, where birds get lost, where ancient maps refuse to match. Could those be knots in the memory? Places where something happened, and the planet still remembers? And if that's true, could fault lines be more than fractures? Could they be scars? Could they be scripts? What if the crust moves not just from pressure, but from purpose? What if shifts in the plates are part of how Earth rewrites itself, a form of forgetting or perhaps of rebalancing? Because memory is not always retention. Sometimes it is release. We forget to survive, to move forward. Perhaps Earth does too. Perhaps some of what it loses, forests, species, ice, is not neglect but healing. A natural rhythm of what to carry and what to let go. And yet, some things return. Forms reappear. Species echo. Ideas recur. As if the planet is looping not randomly, but deliberately. Learning, adjusting, remembering not in detail but in direction. A kind of deep awareness. Not conscious, perhaps, but responsive, participatory. And if Earth has memory, then we are part of it. Not separate, not guests, but entries, recorded in biology, in movement, in the subtle electromagnetic trails of thought and breath and intention. And if we are entries, then what happens when we begin to listen back? What stories might the planet be waiting to share? What signals are still pulsing in the crust, in the sky, in the water? And what happens when we realize that the ground beneath us has been paying attention all along? And perhaps so has the forest, not in voice, not in vision, but in the way it catches moments, in the way it holds stillness, in the way it turns motion into memory one droplet at a time. Amber, fossilized tree resin, warm, translucent, gold. A stone that was once fluid, once flowing from wounds and bark, now hardened by time into glass. Not just beautiful, but secretive, because inside it, things remain. Perfect insects caught mid-wing, spider silk, suspended between lifetimes, pollen, air bubbles, fragments of a world no longer here, held with impossible delicacy. Not decayed, not crumbled, not changed, simply paused. Amber doesn't just preserve form, preserves intention. The curled antenna of a beetle, the folded wing of a fly, the breathless silence of a world sealed in gold. It is not stone that forgets, but resin that remembers. And it raises a question. Is this just accident? A coincidence of biology and chemistry? Sticky sap, bad luck, good timing? Or could it be something more? What if amber is Earth's first archive? Not accidental, not random, but designed, not by us, and not necessarily by nature alone. Because if you were looking to preserve memory across deep time through flood and fire and ice, what would you use? You wouldn't build hard drives. You wouldn't build temples. You'd need something self-assembling, something that flows where life is dense, something that hardens only when needed, something that holds with softness, but survives with strength. Amber. We already use it as a window into the deep past. Scientists study the contents of amber like pages from a lost book, revealing the shape of ancient ecosystems, the timing of extinctions, the quiet rise of flowering plants. DNA has even been recovered, in traces. Not enough to clone, but enough to remember. So what if amber wasn't just a fluke of preservation, but part of the design? What if life itself, trees specifically, were part of a larger memory system, recording not just growth, not just seasons, but moments? An insect population, perfectly captured during collapse. A flowering branch preserved just before the climate shifted. A mosquito, its belly full of blood from a vanished species, sealed before the predator could return. It's almost too perfect. And if the architects, the ones we keep wondering about, had any role in shaping life here, could they have embedded this function into the forest? Could they have placed within the resin of trees a slow, silent way to archive not civilizations, but the wild itself? Maybe amber is Earth's living camera, its natural recorder, an organic medium for memory, activated only in special moments or special places. There are amber deposits across the world, buried in mountains, hidden in mines. Some are over 100 million years old, still clear, still intact, still whispering. And every so often we crack one open. We shine light through it, and we see not decay, but detail. A message, not written in words, but in wings, in legs, in the still gaze of a creature that no longer exists, looking out from its golden sleep. And we feel something, not sadness, not wonder alone, but the sense that someone meant for this to be remembered, that not all fossils were meant to be crushed and compressed, that some were meant to stay. And if amber is the archive, who is it for? Is it for us? Or is it for the Earth itself? A record it can reabsorb when needed, a genetic time capsule, a biological seed bank held in stasis. Not every drop of amber is random. Some, perhaps, were chosen, some moments frozen not by chance, but by care. And if that's true, what else is still sealed? What else waits beneath the soil, behind ancient bark, in unopened mines? A bee with forgotten instincts, a flower with extinct fragrance, a cell with instructions that never got the chance to awaken. We don't know, but we keep finding them. And maybe, someday we'll find something we weren't supposed to forget. Something the resin held not because it was trapped, but because it was protected. And maybe protection was never random. Maybe it was part of something broader, deeper. Something not just about what life remembers, but what life is allowed to become. Because life doesn't just happen. It's permitted, by balance, by thresholds, by invisible margins that decide what can grow and what cannot. We live in a zone so narrow it feels accidental. Planet not too hot, not too cold. Air just thick enough to breathe. Water stable in all three forms. Ice, liquid, vapor, circulating gently between land and sky. Oxygen held at a concentration that fuels fire, but doesn't burn the forests to ash. Feels convenient. Feels lucky. But what if it's more than that? What if the biosphere was tuned? As if Earth wasn't just alive, but composed. A planetary song. Structured, measured, balanced in tones we've only begun to hear. We already know life depends on delicate settings. Oxygen must hover near 21. Too little and large animals struggle. Too much and lightning ignites the world. Atmospheric pressure allows water to remain liquid, lungs to function, sound to travel. Even temperature gradients, across latitudes, altitudes, ocean layers, govern biodiversity like invisible conductors. And yet these values don't drift wildly. They fluctuate, yes, but within a narrow band, as if they're being held, maintained, not with precision, but with intention. Could it be? Could Earth systems be set points, parameters adjusted long ago, not fixed by chance but chosen to support a specific range of complexity? It's a question both haunting and beautiful, because if so, the planet isn't just hosting life. It's inviting it, encouraging it, conducting it. There's a theory known as the Gaia hypothesis that Earth functions like a single self-regulating organism, maintaining conditions favorable to life through the interplay of geology, biology, and atmosphere. It's not a machine. It's not a mind. But it responds. It self-corrects. When carbon rises, weathering increases. When oxygen climbs, wildfires balance it back down. When temperatures tip, ice or cloud cover nudges the thermostat. Some see this as evolution on a planetary scale. But others wonder if the tuning goes deeper, more deliberate. What if the Gaia we sense is not just an emergent property, but a leftover calibration? What if Earth's biosphere was set, softly, by distant architects, not as rulers, not as gods, but as composers. They may not have written the melody, but perhaps they built the instrument. A world tuned to allow life not just to exist, but to ascend, to explore complexity, to reach for consciousness. The tuning could be subtle, embedded in the crust's chemistry, in the ocean's salinity, in the structure of the atmosphere itself. Perhaps even in the moon's size, its stabilizing effect on Earth's tilt, its pull on the tides. So many coincidences, lining up like notes in a song. And if the biosphere is a song, then are we listening, or are we part of the music? Every heartbeat, every breath, every leaf that unfolds in spring, all within range, all within rhythm, life humming within its allowed frequency, echoing a harmony set long ago. But we are changing the song now, raising the carbon, melting the ice, acidifying the oceans. And still, Earth adjusts. But for how long? If this world was tuned, how much dissonance can it hold? How far can the melody bend before the instrument breaks? And if it does, will something or someone retune it? Or has the composer already gone? Maybe the tuning was a gift, kindness, a way of saying, "Here, try." And now we are the ones holding the baton, unsure of the tempo, forgetting we're not just part of the audience, but part of the performance. Still playing, still unfolding. And somewhere beneath the sky and above the mantle, the biosphere listens. Not judging, just humming, waiting to hear whether we remember the key, whether we find our way back to harmony, or write something entirely new. But even as we listen for that melody, even as we marvel at the tuning, the atmosphere, the design, a quieter question lingers beneath it all. Where are they? The others, the architects, the engineers, the ones we keep sensing between the layers of biology and stone. If they shaped us, if they nudged evolution, tuned the air, seeded the oceans, coded the spark of mitochondria into our cells, then where did they go? Did they leave? Did they vanish? Or did they stay but change? We look up, of course, into the stars, into the silence of space, hoping to find signs of life beyond Earth. But maybe we're looking in the wrong direction. Maybe they're not out there anymore. Maybe they're in here, not watching but woven. Because disappearing doesn't always mean leaving. Sometimes it means becoming. Could they have turned inward, not into hiding, but into matter? Into code? Into the invisible instructions inside every living thing? It's not impossible. We already encode vast amounts of data into DNA. We already blur the lines between software and biology. What if they, millions of years ahead of us, found a way to continue not as beings but as information? What if they became memory? And if so, maybe we are what's left, not as a reflection, but as a continuation. Maybe we were never supposed to meet them. Maybe the purpose was never contact, but inheritance. To receive what they could no longer carry forward in form, and pass it on in function. A slow becoming not through teaching, but through time. They may have started as visitors, or gardeners, or something else we don't yet have a word for. But over time, they may have dissolved into the very processes they once shaped. Into biology, into ecosystem, into planet, like salt disappearing into the sea. Not gone, but present in every drop. Maybe that's why we can't find them. Because we are not supposed to find them. We are supposed to be them, or become them. There are myths in almost every culture of beings who arrived from the sky, taught the ways of fire, of language, of agriculture, and then left. Or faded. Or walked into the mountains and never returned. Maybe those stories aren't memories. Maybe they're imprints. Echoes of a truth too large to be held in history. Maybe they came only briefly, to place something that could grow, and then stepped away into the silence, trusting time to unfold what they began. Or maybe they never had bodies like ours. Maybe they were never things that walked or breathed or needed ships to travel. Maybe they were patterns, fields, quantum impressions carried across light. And maybe they still are, watching, not necessarily, but present, embedded in the way cells divide, in the way thought arises from matter, in the uncanny symmetry of the double helix. Maybe they're not watching from above. Maybe they're watching from within. Or maybe they're gone. Truly gone. Extinguished by entropy, by choice, by the very forces they once learned to bend. Maybe Earth was their last attempt or one of many. And maybe life here is the only remnant of their existence. Not their child. Not their monument. Just their echo. But even echoes carry shape. Even echoes suggest something made the sound. And when we look into our own complexity, when we find architecture in the genome, elegance in chemistry, timing in extinction, we can't help but ask, was this built? Was this guided? Was someone here? And more haunting still, are they still here? Not as a they, not as a who, but as a question, an impulse, a loop still running in the background of life. Some say the universe may be a simulation. Others say it's a story. But what if it's neither? What if it's a message? And what if we are not the audience, but the reply? So when we ask, where are the others now? Perhaps the answer is not a location. Perhaps it's a realization that the others are not missing. They are present, in the cells, in the soil, in the questions we keep asking, and in the long, slow breath of a planet still unfolding something it began a very long time ago. But what if it didn't begin with life? What if it began with intention? Before the forests, before the oceans, before the first trembling strand of DNA? What if Earth was a kind of canvas, not for evolution but for design? Not a home, a workshop. There's an idea whispered quietly across the edge of scientific speculation, the golem hypothesis. Named after the clay beings of myth, animated by breath and word, created not born. It asks, what if life didn't arise naturally on Earth, but was built? What if biology as we know it is an artifact, constructed, calibrated, placed? The idea is strange, but sometimes strange questions point toward new clarity. Imagine the early Earth, violent, raw, unformed, a world of heat and lightning, volcanic glass, minerals flowing through primitive oceans, not yet alive, but reactive, responsive, ready. This was not a garden. This was a lab bench. To us, clay is earth softened by water, shaped by hand, baked by fire. But in this metaphor, Earth was the clay. Planet of ingredients. Carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, sulfur. The same elements that build stars and cells. And maybe someone saw it. Not as chance, but as opportunity. Perhaps these distant minds, the architects, the engineers, the watchers, had shaped life before. Not randomly, not passively, but intentionally. Life as sculpture. Life as tool. Not in the way we imagine, with arms and eyes and hunger, but as systems, engines, programs of living chemistry designed for specific tasks. And Earth? Earth was malleable. It had the right temperatures, the right materials, the right rhythms. It needed no factory. It was the factory. So they came not in ships, perhaps, but in fragments, in signals, in clouds of encoded particles or long-forgotten machines now indistinguishable from geology. And they began to shape, not by assembling, but by influencing, by guiding chemistry, by encouraging bonds, by placing templates into the swirling soup of early oceans and letting time bake the rest. They didn't sculpt life like a statue. They programmed it like a process. Each molecule a gear. Each gene a hinge. Each cell a memory. Life as artifact. Not spontaneous. Not evolved in the pure Darwinian sense. But bootstrapped. Synthetic. Directed not toward beauty or chaos, but toward continuity. Not a creature, but a construct. And the golem hypothesis asks, if life was built, what was it built for? Was it a message? A tool? A probe? A kind of soft machine, grown to gather data, to transform atmosphere, to carry the essence of its makers across distance unbridgeable by bodies? We already build life in labs. We already craft synthetic cells. We design proteins to fold in ways nature never conceived. Is it so impossible to believe that others, long before us, did the same? And Earth, then, would be not just alive, but crafted, its biosphere a self-replicating engine, its organisms' iterations, its intelligence, ours, the eventual byproduct of a system meant not to survive, but to remember. Perhaps we are not nature. Perhaps we are function. But even if that's true, does it lessen us? Does it erase wonder? Or does it deepen it? Because if we were built, then something chose to build us. If we were sculpted, then something saw potential in this mud, this fire, this sky. We may be artifacts, but we are still aware. And that awareness, no matter its origin, carries something sacred. It allows us to ask, to imagine, to listen for the hands that once pressed into the clay of early earth, and then vanished. Or maybe they didn't vanish. Maybe we are what their fingers became. Maybe our breath is their breath, their code, their continuation. Maybe the golem woke up, and now wanders the earth, still shaping, still unfolding, still remembering. Not through stone or fire, but through thought. And perhaps through something older, something that fell long before thought began, before language, before blood, before even the first cell remembered how to divide. Not from the sky above, but from far beyond it. Because sometimes, to understand where life began, we don't look up. We look down, into the earth, into the stone, into what has fallen, and been folded into the planet's body. Cosmic seeds, buried deep. It's easy to forget that Earth is not closed. It's porous. It breathes. It receives. Every year, tons of material drift down from space. Dust, fragments, whispers of ancient rock. And sometimes what falls is stranger. Meteorites made not only of metal and stone, but of carbon, of amino acids, of complex molecules, patterns that resemble the scaffolding of life. We found them. Inside some meteorites are chains of carbon too long to be noise. Left-handed amino acids, just like those used by life on Earth. Molecules that fold and twist and shimmer with potential. It raises a quiet question. Did life begin here, or did it arrive? This is the heart of panspermia, the idea that life, or its seeds, came not from Earth itself, but from somewhere far older. Carried not in ships, but in stones, drifting, falling, waiting. We often imagine extraterrestrial life as something distant, on another planet, in another system. But what if it came here long ago? Not as visitors, but as spores. Code without context. Instructions sealed inside the cores of ancient rocks, scattered across the cosmos like pollen in the wind. And Earth, warm, wet, fertile, simply caught the right seed. Maybe that's all it took. One impact. One molecular whisper, and life began to unfurl. But there's another layer to this idea. What if it wasn't chance? What if these seeds were sent? Not just scattered by nature, but placed with intention. Launched from dying worlds, from ancient minds, from civilizations long vanished into entropy. Directed panspermia. Not a meteor by accident, but a delivery system, quiet arc. And now, the remnants may still lie beneath us, because meteorites don't just burn up. Some survive, some bury deep, into clay, into silt, into the folds of Earth's oldest continents. What's buried in those deep layers? In the oldest rock formations? In the cratons that haven't moved in billions of years? Could there be messages? Not in words, but in arrangement? Could isotopic ratios themselves be clues? Patterns of decay that don't follow expected paths? Signatures of creation? We already read isotope data to track climate, extinction, volcanoes. But what if some of those shifts, subtle, precise, deliberate, are artificial? Like breadcrumbs, like a map left in chemistry, waiting for minds like ours to arise and learn how to read. Or maybe some seeds never sprouted. Maybe they lie dormant, still encoded, buried beneath miles of sediment. Not dead, just paused, waiting for the right conditions, the right temperature, the right biology to activate them. Could we find them? Could we awaken something placed here before we knew how to ask? It's not just science fiction. It's scientific humility, the awareness that our understanding of origin is still incomplete. That Earth is part of a system older than itself. That the building blocks of life are everywhere. And maybe, placed everywhere. Because what better way to survive the death of your own world than to send life forward, tucked in stone, carried by time, not to be found, but to grow. And maybe Earth was not the only recipient. Maybe life, or something like it, is blooming elsewhere, seeded from the same dust. Maybe we are not the only garden, only the one that bloomed here. And if so, then what else might be buried beneath us? What else might be waiting? Not in the sky, not in the myths, but in the deepest layers of earth. Stone pressed tight around a secret, ancient and silent, yet still intact. A seed, a story, a memory. And if that story began not with randomness but with design, if life on earth was not grown purely through struggle, but assembled with care, arranged like language, placed like architecture, then what does that make us? Not an accident, not an inevitability, but a fabrication. It's a delicate word, fabrication. Carries the weight of art, of labor, of intention. To fabricate is to make something on purpose. Not to wait for it, not to discover it, but to bring it into being with hands, with vision, with foresight. What changes if we weren't simply evolved, but constructed? If biology is not just a dance of molecules and mutations, but the unfolding of a blueprint, even a loosely drawn one, what does that mean for how we live? Does it take away wonder, or deepen it? Maybe we are not the product of chance, but of curiosity, of someone, somewhere, asking what form life might take if given the right conditions. Not to dominate, not to replicate themselves, but to see what would arise. Not creators in their image, but a new image entirely. The golem, the artifact, the bloom. And if that's true, if we are assembled rather than emerged, then where does that leave responsibility? Because machines don't question their place in the world. But we do. And if we were shaped not simply as organisms but as observers, as participants in a wider cosmic conversation, then perhaps our greatest responsibility is not to survive, but to listen, to remember, to wonder. We look at DNA as a tool for building bodies, but it is also a message, a continuity, a way of passing knowledge not through language but through structure. We are not just living beings. We are libraries, containing echoes of every change, every refinement, every loss and re-beginning. And that means something. It means the story isn't just around us. It's in us. And perhaps the story isn't about us at all. Perhaps we are only the next line in a paragraph still being written, a brief rhythm in a longer poem. And if we were made, assembled as part of that poem, then we have choices. Not in where we came from, but in how we respond. Do we ignore the structure? Do we claim it's meaningless? Or do we begin to honor the possibility that we were placed here not as an endpoint, but as a beginning? There is humility in that idea, and beauty, because if we are fabricated, then we are intended not necessarily in detail but in spirit. And to live intentionally is to live with reverence. For Earth, for others, for the strange and quiet laws that hold it all together. Even now, we build machines that learn. We sculpt code. We grow synthetic organisms. And we wonder, would they one day ask about us? Would they wonder who made them and why? Would they dream of purpose? Would they ache with the weight of being? Perhaps we are already living that dream, the dream of something once fabricated, becoming self-aware. Not to serve, not to obey, but to reflect, to ask, to pass on. And maybe that's what the architects wanted. Not worship, not recognition, just continuation, just emergence, just a species that would one day look up from the dust and the stars and ask, "What am I?" and care about the answer, even if it never comes. Because maybe the question is the point. Maybe wonder is the function. And if we are fabricated, then wonder is not a byproduct. It is the design. But if we were designed to wonder, then what are we really walking through? This life, this world, this long unfolding of seasons and stories, is it unfolding freely? Or have we been moving through a kind of script? Something written long before we opened our eyes? Not in words, not in prophecy, but in biology. A performance not memorized, but embedded. Quiet instructions held in the helix of our cells, in the shape of our thoughts, in the rituals we repeat without knowing why. What if we are sleepwalking through a biological play, reacting to cues placed so far back in time that we've forgotten they were ever placed at all? We move, we build, we form societies, tools, languages. We repeat patterns. We rise and fall and rise again. And through it all, we feel original, spontaneous, awake. But maybe we are only just waking. Maybe the world we call our own is more stage than wilderness. A stage tuned for breath and blood and memory. A set built not from wood and backdrop, but from temperature gradients, pressure zones, magnetic fields. Props made of trees and tides and turning skies. And the lines? Maybe we speak them every day. Maybe we are them. The repetition is subtle, but it's there. The same myths in different tongues. The same fears. The same architectures drawn by cultures that never touched. The spiral. The tower. The eye. We call them coincidence. Archetype. The shared murmur of evolution shaping minds in similar ways. But what if they're remnants? Not coincidences, but chorus lines, echoing deeper choreography. What if there's something in us, a program, a rhythm, that pulls us to certain forms, certain truths again and again? Not to control us, not to trap us, but to remind us that there was a beginning, that there was an intention, that there was a stage, and perhaps still is. Not one we must leave, but one we must notice. Because if we are sleepwalking through a scripted world, then waking is not rebellion. It's awareness. To remember that the forest may be more than trees, that the ocean may still hum with its first instructions, that the stars are not only lights, but markers, carefully placed set pieces above a stage we've mistaken for background. And when we slow down, when we quiet ourselves enough to feel it, we sometimes sense it. A faint familiarity, a strange déjà vu, the sense that we've been here before, or that the world was waiting for us in some specific shape, that our questions are not just new but remembered. Maybe we are actors who've forgotten the story, or audiences who've stepped onto the stage, or characters who, in becoming self-aware, are rewriting the next act, one breath at a time. It's not a loss of freedom, it's a change of focus, because what matters is not whether the world is scripted. What matters is whether we're willing to notice the script, to read between the lines, to see the loops, and to ask softly, what is the next cue, and who are we performing for? Or maybe there is no audience. Maybe we are performing for no one but the memory embedded inside us, the echo of something ancient and quiet that set this stage long before we opened our eyes. Because sometimes it feels like we've arrived in the middle of a story, as if the first act happened without us, as if the lights rose, and we were already moving, reacting, responding, remembering things we never learned. We wake, we breathe, we build. We fall in love, we destroy, we dream. And all the while, we walk through a world so perfectly balanced, so strangely poetic, it feels more like choreography than chance. And we rarely stop to ask, whose steps are we following? Whose lines are we reciting? Could it be that life, all life, is not only evolving, but performing? Not in a theater, but on a stage of mineral and water and sky. Not for applause, but for continuity. Not scripted word for word, but structured, like a song passed down through instinct. What if evolution itself is a kind of rehearsal? What if our choices, our languages, our civilizations are not the first of their kind, but echoes, refinements, variations on an older theme? It's possible that our biology contains more than survival. It may contain memory, not the memory of faces or names, but the memory of rhythm, of direction, of shape, the memory of paths once taken, now walked again without knowing why. Maybe the spiral appears across cultures because it wants to. Maybe we build cities in circles and grids because the blueprint is already inside us. Maybe the stories we tell of origin, of fall, of light and shadow are not just imagination, but reaction. We are not actors on a stage. We are the stage. We are the unfolding of a long-forgotten idea. And perhaps we are only just now beginning to realize that the ground beneath us isn't only soil. its script. That the instincts we follow aren't only animal, they're inherited choreography. That the thoughts we think, the dreams we chase, the questions we whisper at night, they're not new. They're remembered. And maybe that's why we feel so much awe and confusion at once. Because waking up inside a story is not the same as writing it. It's not control we're seeking. It's clarity. The knowledge that this world, with its perfect balance of chaos and order, might be more than it appears. That we might be more than we appear. Maybe we're here to continue a pattern that began before names were possible. Maybe consciousness itself is the moment the character realizes it's holding the script and chooses to turn the page, not to escape it, but to honor it. Because even if the stage was set, even if the lines were written, even if the scenery was painted by minds not our own, we are the breath behind the voice. We are the ones walking it now. And if we are sleepwalking, then waking is not disruption. Waking is remembering. And if we're remembering, what else have we forgotten?